let's talk about you. I mean, you had this experience of being the White House press secretary. How was it for you, being there as the first woman? Tell us what you felt and what you learned from that experience.
Yeah, well, in your introduction, you alluded to it. I went to work for Bill Clinton in the fall of 1991, one of the early people to go to work on his presidential campaign. No one gave him a snowball's chance in hell of being elected. But somehow over the course of the next 13 or 14 or 15 months, he was elected. And but during that campaign, as many of you will recall, he promised to have a government that looked like America, which I thought was an admirable pledge. But when the time came to start making appointments, he was getting a lot of pressure from interest groups, among them, and maybe in particular women, saying, you're not appointing enough women to high and visible positions. And I kind of sailed into that. I was 31 years old, as Tina pointed out. I'd never worked in Washington. And I think I had a great relationship with Bill Clinton. We'd worked together and worked well together for more than a year. And I know he wanted to find a place in the White House for me. And I think he maybe wasn't sure I was quite ready at that moment to be press secretary. And yet, he was getting pressure. So not only did he want credit for appointing the first woman White House press secretary, he didn't want to get blamed for throwing me over for a guy. So he gave me the job. But I had a lower rank and a smaller office and a lesser salary, all symbolically important, not just in Washington, but particularly in Washington. And I had watched this happen to other women, and I'd always said, I'm never going to let that happen to me, and yet here I was, right? And of course, first I objected, and then I agreed. So I took the job knowing that, but with promises that, it'll get better, we'll fix it, we'll work it out, as they always do. And so I went into it with both my eyes wide open and my back up a little bit, but it was difficult because not only was that a signal that my position was less important than it had been, but there were a number of other people, men, with overlapping responsibilities, and they were all allies of mine. David Gergen, who many of you see on TV, George Stephanopoulos, and another guy named Mark Gearin, and we all had overlapping responsibilities in different ways. And we were all allies, and it wasn't that they intentionally left me out a lot of times, but if people went to the more senior person, and if they told David Gergen something, they thought they told the press and communications department, and a lot of times the word didn't get to me, and I wasn't always in the meetings, and I didn't always find out. So I struggled with that. And finally, when Leon Panetta became chief of staff, a year and a half into the first term, one of his charges was to reorganize the White House press, the West Wing staff, which clearly, Tina went through some of the scandals of the early months. We needed it.
They were all your fault. We know that.
Yeah, we all lived through it. But anyway, I at that time I went to Panetta and I said, this can't continue. You have to reestablish the authority of the press secretary. It's not serving the president, and sure as heck isn't serving me. And we had a bit of a disagreement about it. And Leon asked me. He said, "Well, you're gonna have to take this to the president," and so I did. And the president said, "Okay," but when I went to him, I said, "If I want the full authority of the press secretary. I wanted the big office. I want the rank. I want the salary." But I said, "If you give it to me, I'll leave at the end of the year." So in order to get what I needed to do the job, I had to agree to leave, or I did agree to leave. I don't know if I would have had to. In hindsight, that's the only thing I wonder if I went into him and said, "I think I deserve a shot at this now," if he would have given it to me.
Well, that's very interesting because do you think that was your, again, kind of self-editing woman's self-doubt?
Yeah, probably.
That you didn't go in and instead of saying, it was very, in fact, actually, cheers for you that you went in and aggressively sort of staked out your position there. But, but did you have to say, I'm going?
I don't know. I should have tested the proposition, right? And then that could have been my fallback position. But you're right. I think that women, we too often, way too often, sell ourselves short, don't go in there with the expectation that we're going to get what we deserve. And I think that happens and it's one of the themes that kept coming up among all the women that I interviewed was a lot of times women will come and they'll downplay their own fabulous accomplishments. I talked to Shirley Tillman, who's the fabulous first woman president of Princeton, and she was telling me a story about the Daily Prince, the daily campus paper, had run a story a couple of years earlier about two students who had both won, a male and a female, a young man and a young woman, who had both won the Westinghouse Science Prize, which is a very prestigious award. And they talked to both of these students, and the boy said, "Oh yeah, my science experiment was fabulous. It was great. I knew I was going to win." And the girl said, "I didn't think mine was so good. I was so surprised." And it's just so typical, even among these young, brilliant, equally talented scientists. One thinks he totally deserves to be there, and the other is so surprised.
Yeah.